Alpha King found Omega locked outside the gates and asked who ordered the banishment without him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The cold wind howled through the empty streets as Emma Carter stood at the gates of the kingdom, her breath misting in the chill night air. She had been standing there for what felt like hours, the heavy metal doors towering above her, a silent reminder of her banishment. Locked out, abandoned. The ground beneath her feet was damp, and she could feel the sharp sting of the night creeping into her bones. She had never imagined this moment, never thought that the Alpha King, Alexander Blackwood, would let this happen. She had been a loyal Omega, always staying in the background, never causing trouble. So why was she here? Why had she been cast aside like this? Her heart ached with confusion, her mind racing to piece together the fragments of the story that had led to this moment. She knew she wasn't supposed to question the order of the Alphas, but this felt different. This felt wrong. She thought about the days leading up to her exile, the whispers in the hallways, the glances behind closed doors. Someone had orchestrated this, but who? And why? The soft crunch of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts. She turned quickly, her eyes locking with the piercing gaze of the Alpha King himself. His tall, broad figure loomed in the moonlight, casting a long shadow over her. Alexander Blackwood, the Alpha King. His eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to scan her every movement as he slowly approached. His presence alone was enough to make anyone feel small, insignificant, but Emma didn't flinch. She stood her ground, even as her heart pounded in her chest. "What are you doing here, Emma?" His voice was low, tinged with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. She swallowed hard before responding, her voice trembling but steady. "I've been locked out. Your Majesty, I want to know who ordered my banishment." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of her desperation. For a moment, the Alpha King said nothing. His eyes flickered, almost as if he were weighing his options. Emma knew he could have easily turned away, left her there to rot, but instead, he studied her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Who dared to make this decision without consulting me?" Alexander's words were a low growl, the anger in his tone barely contained. Emma watched him closely, seeing the brief flash of something beneath the surface, something more than just the cold ruler she had always known. Was it regret? Or perhaps something else entirely? The silence stretched on for a moment longer before he spoke again, his voice a bit softer this time. "I'll find out who did this, Emma. But for now, you need to come inside. We'll discuss this further." Emma nodded slowly, the weight of the Alpha King's words settling heavily in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but she followed him, stepping through the gates she had once thought would never close behind her. As they walked through the gates, Emma felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. The sound of the heavy doors closing behind them echoed in her ears, sealing her back inside the kingdom she once called home. The air felt thick with tension, and she couldn't help but glance at Alexander, who was walking beside her. His stride was confident, but there was something about the way he carried himself tonight that seemed different. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something Emma couldn't quite place. They made their way through the dimly lit corridors of the palace, the distant echo of their footsteps the only sound breaking the silence. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. "This way." Alexander's voice broke through her thoughts as he turned down a narrow hallway. She followed without question, her heart beating faster as they approached a large, ornate door at the end. He pushed it open with a smooth, practiced motion and stepped aside to let her enter first. The room was warm, a stark contrast to the coldness outside. A large fireplace crackled at one end, casting a soft glow across the room. A few chairs were scattered around a low table, and the windows offered a stunning view of the kingdom's sprawling grounds. But despite the beauty of the space, Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She walked in, her feet feeling heavy, as though she were walking into a place she no longer belonged. Alexander closed the door behind him, his gaze never leaving her. He walked to the fireplace, his back to her for a moment as he stared into the flames. "I need answers, Emma," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. "I need to know why you were locked outside. Why someone thought they could do this without consulting me." Emma looked at him, unsure of how to respond. She had no answers, not really. But she had a feeling that the truth was much darker than she had ever imagined. She crossed her arms, standing near the edge of the room, as she gathered her thoughts. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was safe here, in the kingdom. But someone had it out for me." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Alexander turned to face her then, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you think I had something to do with this?" he asked, his voice a little sharper now. Emma froze. She hadn't considered that possibility, not until now. But the question lingered, and she couldn't ignore the discomfort it brought. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I don't think you had anything to do with it. I don't understand why this is happening." Alexander sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair, the weight of the situation clearly pressing on him. "I don't know who did this either," he admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. "But I will find out. I promise you that." Emma met his gaze, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he would get to the bottom of this. But there was still so much she didn't know, so many unanswered questions. "Thank you," she said quietly. I need to know the truth. I need to know why I was cast out like that." Alexander nodded, his expression softening just slightly. "We'll figure it out, Emma. Together." The words were simple, but in that moment, they gave her a sense of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in the midst of the uncertainty, that small flicker of hope was all she had left. The room was quiet now, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Emma stood by the window, staring out at the kingdom's vast landscape, her mind still racing. The uncertainty weighed on her. Even though Alexander had promised to help her, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than he was letting on. She had seen the way his eyes had narrowed when she spoke of the banishment. There was something he wasn't saying. Something important. "I'm going to find out who did this, Emma," Alexander had said earlier, but the more she thought about it, the more she wondered if that was true. Could she really trust him? Could she trust anyone? The kingdom was full of politics, alliances, and betrayals. She had been on the outside before, but now, she was trapped inside these walls with no idea who was friend and who was foe. She heard footsteps approach, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I've sent word to the council," he said, his voice firm. "They will investigate the matter. We'll get to the bottom of this." Emma didn't reply right away. She wasn't sure what to say. It wasn't that she didn't believe him. She did. It was just that she didn't believe the system. She had seen how easily people could turn on each other in this world, especially in the court of the Alpha King. "I appreciate it," she finally said, her voice quiet but steady. I need answers. I need to know why this happened." Alexander nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I know. We all do. But right now, the best thing you can do is stay here, stay safe." The words were meant to comfort, but they only made Emma feel more isolated. Safe. She had been banished from the kingdom, locked out like an unwanted animal. Now, she was supposed to feel safe? She didn't know if she could. Alexander stepped into the room and stood a few feet away from her, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I've heard rumors," he said suddenly, his voice low, "about your banishment. About what happened in the days before you were cast out." Emma turned toward him, her curiosity piqued. "What rumors?" she asked, though part of her feared the answer. "I don't know all the details," he admitted, "but there are whispers of a plot. Someone orchestrated your exile, someone with a lot of power. But no one seems to know who." Emma's heart skipped a beat. A plot. She hadn't imagined that. She had thought it was just a mistake or a misunderstanding, but a plot? That changed everything. "Who?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Who is behind this?" Alexander looked at her, his eyes hardening. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I will find out. I promise." Emma swallowed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in. She had been exiled for a reason, but she had no idea what that reason was. It was all so confusing. But one thing was clear, there were people out there who wanted her gone. And she had to find out why, before it was too late. "Thank you," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. For helping me. I need to know the truth. Alexander's expression softened, and for the briefest moment, Emma saw something in his eyes that wasn't just the cold mask of a ruler. It was empathy. It was something real. We'll get to the truth, he said, his voice sincere. Together. Emma nodded, a small spark of hope igniting in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. For now, it was enough. In the following days, Emma found herself staying in a guest room within the palace, though it felt more like a prison than a place of refuge. The walls were richly adorned, but the grandeur of the room couldn't mask the sense of isolation she felt. The sounds of the palace echoed around her, the busy footsteps of the guards and servants filling the halls, but none of them seemed to acknowledge her presence. She had been told to stay inside, to keep out of sight while Alexander worked to find the truth behind her banishment. But being alone with her thoughts, with nothing to do but wait, made the uncertainty even harder to bear. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. As much as she wanted to trust Alexander, part of her feared that this was all a lie. Perhaps he was just another piece of the game, another powerful figure who would use her as a pawn. The thought made her stomach churn. Emma leaned against the window, her fingers tracing the cold glass. Outside, the kingdom stretched out in all directions, the lands she had once felt so connected to now feeling distant and foreign. The wind blew softly through the trees, carrying the sounds of the bustling village below, but there was no peace in it. She was trapped, locked within the walls of a place that no longer felt like home. Days passed, and still no answers came. Every time Emma asked Alexander about the progress of the investigation, he would give her a reassuring but vague answer. We are getting closer, he would say, but the words did little to calm her nerves. There were still too many questions, too many unknowns. Who had wanted her banished? And why? The council had yet to reveal any details, and Emma was growing impatient. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexander appeared in her room again. This time, there was a sense of urgency in his demeanor that made her stomach tighten. Emma, he said, his voice low. We need to talk. She stood up quickly, her heart racing. What's happened? She asked, her mind already jumping to the worst conclusions. Alexander walked toward her, his face tense. I've learned something, he said, pausing as if weighing his words. Something that might explain everything. Emma held her breath, waiting for him to continue. There's a faction within the council, he said, his eyes narrowing with a look of distrust. A group that has been working against me. They've been undermining my authority for some time now. They were the ones behind your banishment. The revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. She had suspected someone was behind it, but to hear that it was a group within the very council that governed the kingdom was shocking. Emma could barely process the information, her mind spinning. Why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why would they do this? Alexander's expression darkened further. Power, he said simply. They want control, and you were an obstacle. Your position as an Omega, your connections, they were all part of their plan. They thought removing you would weaken me, give them more influence. Emma's head swam with the implications. The betrayal was staggering, and yet it made sense. She had always felt like she didn't quite belong in the world of alphas and betas, but she never imagined that her very existence could be a threat to anyone. What happens now? She asked, her voice small but determined. Alexander's eyes softened, and for a moment, he almost seemed vulnerable. Now we fight back, he said quietly. Together. His words brought a spark of hope, but Emma knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The battle for the truth had just begun, and there was no telling what obstacles they would face. But one thing was certain. She wouldn't be standing alone. Not anymore. The next few days were filled with tense discussions and careful planning. Emma found herself drawn into the heart of the kingdom's politics in ways she had never imagined. Alexander had kept his word. He was moving quickly, gathering information, speaking with those loyal to him, and working in the shadows to uncover the truth about the council's betrayal. Emma was kept mostly in the background, hidden from view to protect her from further danger, but she couldn't sit idly by. She needed to be involved. She needed to understand everything. One afternoon, as she sat by the window, watching the slow movement of the clouds above, Alexander came to her with a solemn look on his face. I've spoken to the council members who remain loyal, he said, sitting beside her. There's a plan in motion, but it's risky. Emma turned toward him, her heart pounding with the weight of the conversation. What kind of plan? She asked. Alexander took a deep breath, his jaw tightening slightly. We're going to expose the faction behind this. We have to act quickly before they can do any more damage. But to do that, we'll need to gather support, and that won't be easy. Emma nodded, her mind racing. She had seen how the court worked, how quickly alliances could shift, and how fragile power could be. The idea of exposing the council's betrayal was daunting, but she knew it was the only way to clear her. Name and stop whatever plot had been set in motion against Alexander. How can I help? She asked, her voice steady, though she felt the fear gnawing at her. Alexander met her gaze, his eyes softening for a moment. I need you to stay strong, Emma. You'll need to be a symbol of hope for those who are still loyal to the kingdom. People need to see that you're not a threat, that you're not the reason for all of this. Emma clenched her fists, determination rising in her chest. I can do that. I'll be the symbol they need. The thought of standing in front of the kingdom's people, exposed once again after everything that had happened, terrified her. But she couldn't back down now. There was too much at stake. Alexander's gaze softened as he placed a hand on her shoulder. I know you can, and we'll do this together. Over the next few days, Emma's role in the plan became clearer. She would appear in public, walking the palace grounds, showing that she was not a threat, not an outsider. It was a delicate balancing act, but one that could potentially shift the balance of power. Alexander would speak with key figures, calling for their support, and Emma would serve as the proof that the faction was wrong. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was their only hope. As Emma prepared to step into the public eye once again, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. What would happen if the faction's plan succeeded? What if there were more enemies than they realized? The uncertainty made her stomach twist, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't face this alone. Not anymore. Together, she and Alexander would fight for what was right, even if it meant going up against the very system that had once cast her aside. The day arrived when Emma was finally ready to step outside the palace and into the public eye once again. She stood in front of a large mirror, adjusting the simple but elegant gown Alexander had chosen for her. It wasn't flashy, but it was dignified. She needed to appear calm, collected, and unthreatening, despite the storm that churned inside her. Her reflection stared back at her, a young Omega who had been cast aside, now tasked with being the symbol of change. She couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the future of the kingdom. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she heard the soft knock on her door. Emma. Alexander's voice came from the other side. Are you ready? His voice was calm, but there was a hint of concern in it. She turned away from the mirror and walked to the door. When she opened it, she found Alexander standing there, dressed in his usual royal attire. His eyes were soft, but there was determination behind them. She could see it. He was ready to take this step with her, no matter what happened. I'm ready, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Alexander gave her a reassuring nod, stepping into the room and offering her his arm. Let's go then, he said, his voice low but steady. As they walked through the halls of the palace, Emma's heart raced. She had seen this place 1,000 times, but today, everything felt different. She wasn't just a quiet Omega anymore. She was a part of something much bigger, something that could change everything. The courtyard was filled with people as they arrived, murmurs of conversation floating through the air. Emma felt a sense of unease wash over her as she took in the sea of faces. They were watching her, judging her, waiting to see if she would prove the rumors wrong. She couldn't blame them. After everything that had happened, they were entitled to their doubts. But she couldn't let that stop her. As she stepped out into the center of the courtyard, she felt Alexander's hand on her back, a silent support that steadied her. The crowd fell silent as she took her first step forward, her eyes focused ahead, not letting her nerves take control. Alexander spoke first, his voice carrying across the courtyard. People of the kingdom, he said, his tone firm, yet welcoming. I stand before you with Emma, who has been unjustly cast out, and who has suffered greatly. It is time to set the record straight. No longer will we hide the truth. He turned to Emma then, his gaze filled with something deeper. Perhaps it was trust, or maybe something more. Emma, this kingdom owes you an apology. Emma stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Her heart was pounding, But she knew this moment was crucial. It wasn't just about her. It was about proving that the truth would always come to light. I stand here today not as someone who has been wronged, but as someone who is determined to find justice for all who have suffered, she said, her voice steady, though it trembled slightly. The people who exiled me thought they could erase me, thought they could silence the truth, but they were wrong. I will not be silenced, and neither will this kingdom. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Emma could see the shift in the crowd's reaction. Whispers began to spread, but they weren't the whispers of judgment she had feared. They were whispers of understanding, of realization. For the first time, she felt like the people saw her, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. Alexander's hand was still on her back, and he gave her a small nod of approval. The path ahead was far from certain, but for the first time in a long while, Emma felt like she was no longer fighting alone. She was standing with the one person who truly believed in her, and together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The next few weeks were filled with uncertainty, but also with small victories. Emma had slowly started to earn the trust of the people in the kingdom. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't fast, but with each passing day, the whispers that once doubted her began to shift. She had kept her promise to Alexander. She had stood tall and fought to show that she wasn't the enemy, that she wasn't the cause of the kingdom's problems. With every appearance, every speech, she began to reclaim her place, piece by piece. But there was still much to be done. The council's faction had not given up. Emma knew that even though they had made some progress, the true battle was just beginning. They had to find out who was behind the plots, who had orchestrated her banishment, and most importantly, why they had targeted Alexander. Every night, as Emma lay awake in the silence of her room, she couldn't help but think about the enormity of the task ahead. She had come to trust Alexander more than anyone else, but even he seemed to be feeling the pressure. There were moments when his gaze would flicker with exhaustion, a slight weariness he hadn't shown before. The weight of leadership was heavy on him, and Emma knew that the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous things would become. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alexander invited Emma to walk with him in the garden. The air was cool, and the moonlight bathed the flowers in a soft, ethereal glow. For a moment, the world seemed peaceful, as though the palace and all its problems could be forgotten. "You've done well," Alexander said quietly as they walked, his hand brushing against hers briefly before he pulled it back. "The people are starting to believe in you, in us. We're making progress." Emma nodded, though her mind was far from calm. "I hope so," she said softly. "But I can't help but feel like we're still missing something. There's something off about all of this. I don't understand why they went after me. Why me specifically?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his expression distant. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "I've been wondering the same thing," he admitted. "It doesn't make sense. You weren't the one causing any trouble. If anything, you've always been a stabilizing force in the kingdom. But there's something bigger at play here. Something we don't yet understand." Emma stopped walking, turning to face him. "Do you think they're after you too?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Alexander met her gaze, his eyes steady but filled with the weight of unspoken truths. "Yes," he said simply. "But I'm not going to stop until we find out who's behind all of this. We can't let them win." The determination in his voice was palpable, and it gave Emma the strength to stand taller. She had been through so much already, and now she was ready to face whatever came next. "Then we fight," she said, her voice steady, a new sense of purpose filling her. Together, they stood there for a few moments longer, the night wrapping around them, the stars above seemingly watching over them. In that quiet moment, Emma realized that no matter what the future held, she wasn't alone. She had someone who believed in her, someone who was willing to fight by her side. And together, they would uncover the truth, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be. The days that followed were tense. Emma had begun to understand that while things were progressing, they weren't moving fast enough. The faction within the council was still a threat, their power still unchallenged, and their intentions unclear. Every time Emma walked through the halls of the palace, she could feel eyes watching her, as if waiting for her to falter. She knew the people were beginning to rally around her, but there were still many who didn't trust her, and she couldn't blame them. She had been exiled, and trust was not something that could be earned overnight. Alexander, on the other hand, was unwavering. He had become more determined in his efforts to uncover the full truth, though there was a shadow of worry that followed him, too. Emma could see it in the lines of his face, in the way his shoulders tensed when he spoke of the council. The weight of the kingdom was clearly taking its toll on him. One evening, after a particularly long day, Alexander invited Emma to join him for a quiet walk in the garden once more. The air was cool, the sounds of the palace quieting around them as they strolled through the neatly manicured paths. The quiet moments they shared felt like a brief escape from the looming storm of politics and betrayal. "How are you holding up?" Alexander asked, his voice gentle but full of concern as he glanced at Emma. She looked up at him, trying to smile, but the unease she had been feeling weighed heavily on her. "I'm trying," she said honestly. "It's hard to feel at peace when I know there are people out there still working against us." Alexander's gaze softened. "I know. It's hard to trust anyone when you've been betrayed. But we're closer to finding out who's behind this. I can feel it. We can't give up now." Emma nodded, but deep down, she wondered if there was a deeper truth they hadn't uncovered yet. Something that was still hidden, something that had yet to be revealed. They stopped near a fountain, the soft sound of the water flowing adding a sense of calm to the moment. Alexander stood close, his expression thoughtful. "There's something I've been thinking about," he said, his voice low. "Something I don't think I told you before." Emma turned to look at him, curiosity sparking in her chest. "What is it?" she asked. Alexander hesitated, as if unsure how to continue. "When the banishment happened, it wasn't just about you," he said finally. "It wasn't just a matter of removing you from the kingdom. It was a message, a way to weaken me." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "A message?" she repeated. "But why would they target me? I wasn't important to them." Alexander took a step closer, his eyes intense. "You were important to me," he said softly. "And that's why they chose you. Because they knew that if they hurt you, they could hurt me. And that would give them the leverage they needed to break my resolve, to take control of the kingdom." Emma felt the weight of his words, the realization that the entire situation was far more personal than she had ever imagined. She had always thought of herself as insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but now she understood how deeply her connection with Alexander ran. The thought that someone would go so far to hurt him, to undermine his leadership, made her blood boil. "I won't let them win," she said firmly, her voice filled with determination. "We will fight for this, Alexander. We will expose them, no matter what it takes." Alexander smiled at her, a small but genuine smile. "Together," he said, his voice full of conviction. "We'll get through this, and we'll make sure the truth comes out. I promise." As they stood there, side by side, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had come so far already, and now there was no turning back. They would fight for what was right, no matter the cost. And together, they would bring the truth to light. She could feel the weight of their shared determination, a bond forged in the fire of adversity. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe, truly believe, that they could win. The days seemed to blur together as Emma and Alexander worked tirelessly to unravel the conspiracy that threatened to tear their world apart. The more they uncovered, the darker the picture became. There were layers to the plot, deceitful alliances, hidden motives, and names that Emma had never even considered. She had thought the council was the key, but she soon realized that it wasn't just the council at play. The entire kingdom was on the edge of a shift, and those who wanted power were willing to do anything to achieve it. Despite the mounting tension, there were moments of calm, moments when Emma and Alexander would share quiet conversations, moments when they could almost pretend that the world wasn't collapsing around them. But those moments were fleeting. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous their actions became. Alexander's meetings with his allies grew more frequent and secretive. The tension in the air was palpable. Emma knew it wasn't just about her anymore. She was part of a much larger fight, a fight for the kingdom's future. One evening, as the moonlight streamed through the windows of their shared chambers, Emma sat at the desk, poring over documents that Alexander had brought her. These were the final pieces they needed to put everything together. She read through the names, the transactions, the coded messages that had been carefully hidden. It was all there, plain to see, and yet it still didn't make sense. Why would anyone want to bring down the kingdom this way? Why would they go to such lengths? Just as she was beginning to lose herself in the confusion, she heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she called, not looking up from the papers. Alexander entered, his face drawn, his eyes tired, but there was something different about his presence tonight. A quiet resolve. "I've spoken with the loyalists," he said, his voice steady. "We've made a plan." Emma looked up, her heart pounding in her chest. "What plan?" she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Alexander crossed the room and sat beside her, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering certainty. "We confront them. Tomorrow. We'll present everything we've uncovered to the council and to the people. It's time to put an end to this." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment was coming, but the reality of it was still jarring. This wasn't just a political game anymore. It was a fight for survival. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "This could change everything. The kingdom won't look the same after tomorrow." Alexander nodded, his gaze softening for a moment. "I know, but we can't keep living in the shadows. We can't let them control our future." Emma nodded in return, her resolve solidifying. She had come this far, and now there was no turning back. Together, they had uncovered the truth. Together, they would expose the corruption that had poisoned the kingdom. As they prepared for the confrontation that would change everything, Emma felt a surge of strength that had been building inside her since the day she was cast out. She wasn't the same person who had once been exiled. She was stronger now, wiser. And no matter what happened, she knew she wasn't alone. She had Alexander by her side. And together, they would fight for the future of the kingdom. The next day came quickly, and with it, the weight of the moment. The palace was buzzing with activity as the council gathered for an emergency meeting. Emma and Alexander stood together in the halls, ready to face whatever came next. They had done everything they could. Now, it was time to see if their efforts would be enough to expose the truth and reclaim the future of their kingdom.